Well, hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Certified Forgotten. It's another uncertified episode. Our boy Matt Donato has been traveling the world watching about 1 billion movies at Sundance. And so I enticed him, rather than to try and squeeze a guest in with all his travels, to come sit down with me and talk about Companion. And it's a bonus episode for those of you that might be watching this for the first time on YouTube. We're dipping our hands into uploading video podcasts, at least for Uncertified, at least for right now. So if you're listening to this through your normal feed, we actually have the video version of this on YouTube unless things have gone horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. And then you didn't hear that. No, we didn't. That sound about right, Donato?
I think that does sound about right. That is, I'm just trying to collect myself. I was at Sundance for quite a little bit. And I'm an LA boy. You know, I grew up on the East Coast, but my blood is now thin and I do not have that warmth about me anymore. So this is day one of trying to come back down to reality and altitude.
Yeah, you've really, I mean, you grew up in New Jersey, lived in New York for like 20 odd years, right? Like when it goes away completely. Whatever your temperature resilience was, when it's gone, it's just gone.
I was 30 when I moved to LA. So correct, I was Jersey and then to Long Island for schooling and then to Brooklyn to live. And my first I want to say year when I moved here, I would always make jokes about the locals and you'd see people wearing like North Face jackets when it's about like 60 degrees and I'm running in t-shirt and shorts going, this is so cozy. And well, look at the watch under my sweatshirt. And yeah, 5 years later, I am now one of them.
Very, very true. Well, as a reminder, Uncertified is our 30-minute show. It's where Donato and I talk about a new release. Next week, if things go according to plan, we'll be back to a full hour-long episode with a very, very special guest. We're excited about that. But I'm excited in particular to talk about Companion because this is, spoiler alert, a movie that I really, really, really loved. So it's just coming out this weekend. If you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, a quick plot synopsis for you. For Iris, meeting Josh was love at first sight. That is why she is so determined to make a good first impression with his work friends during a long weekend at the lake house. But when the owner of the guest house gets a little too friendly with Iris, she's forced to defend herself, sparking a turn of violent events that will test Iris and Josh's relationships to its very limits. Feature film debut of writer-director Drew Hancock, Companion is another example of studio horror done right. I want to start this conversation off with a spoiler warning because I want to start this conversation off with a conversation about spoiler warnings. So if you haven't seen Companion, now would be a really good time to check out, go see the film, double back once you've seen it. Donato, $1 million question with regards to this movie that I've actually talked about with multiple film critics is mentioning the fact that Iris is a robot a spoiler? Can you write a review, a synopsis? Can you jump into talking about this movie and at least admit that much, or do you have to avoid that in any good review?
So I think the funny part is I do a live stream with Perry Nemiroff, and this came up because she had seen the film early, you know, could not talk about it except for social reactions. I think the social embargo broke. And I mentioned the trailer dropped. So I was talking about things that I saw in the trailer. And on our live stream, I'm like, oh, yeah. And Sophie Thatcher's playing a love bot. And she kind of balked and looked at me and she's like, wait, like, can we talk about that? And literally, I'm like, it's in the trailer. Like, I know they try to play coy about it, but they make it very clear. Like, you come into this movie knowing what it's about, I think. So
Yeah.
to me, it's one of those unfortunate scenarios where, however much is shown in the marketing, I do feel like that's fair game for critics to talk about. So to me, and my review, so I wrote the review for Daily Dead, and I had to, like, how am I going to talk about this movie but not bring in the idea that this is a commentary on artificial intelligence and all these other things? Like,
Yeah.
if we are not allowed to talk about that, I can't write about a movie. The only other example I can think of recently like that was It's What's Inside. And I saw it at South by Southwest. And the PR agent's like, you can't mention the body swapping at all. And I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? That's the whole movie. Like, literally, if I
Yeah.
can't mention the ensuing event, that is literally what it's about. And again, it's not a spoiler. Like, I'm not going to say what happens after that, but it's a sci-fi body swap comedy. Why do you not want me to tell people what to expect? So for me, Companion, I think we do land on the idea of we have to talk about Sophie Thatcher being a love bot.
Yeah. I think, it is in the material. It's all of the marketing materials spoils that, right? Like you have the trailers that talk about that specifically. The poster for the film shows Sophie Thatcher with like clear, milky white eyes. So the film's not really trying to hide anything from you. And I think there's a lot that happens in Companion that is still there for discovery. I think if you start by saying, out of necessity, Sophie Thatcher's a love bot, blah, 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 that really only gets you 15 minutes into the movie. There's a whole rest of the movie to discover. I also think that this is one of these situations where it depends a little bit on your audience as a writer. Like if I'm writing a review, I'm not writing a review. I'm talking about it on the podcast. But if I am writing a review for this, I'm going to feel comfortable talking about Sophie Thatcher as a robot. But if I'm talking to my friends from back home, if I'm talking to my family, people that don't watch a lot of movies, I'm going to go out of my way not to spoil that because odds are they haven't seen the marketing material. They're not paying as close attention. It's sort of the thing where, like, if you're reading reviews, you probably have a level of engagement where you're familiar with it. And I feel comfortable about that. If you're not reading anything, if you just saw it in a marquee and we're like, man, is this a good movie? Then I'll be a little bit more careful because I think we can at least a little bit cater that to what knowledge about movies in general our audience brings into the theater.
Yeah, and especially the embargo broke pretty early for this one. I think it was like 2 weeks early. They
Yeah.
were hyped on this and they were confident, so they let us talk about it. And I still put a spoiler warning just in case for that reason, because if you did miss all these materials, like my spoiler warning was simple. I feel comfortable talking about this because it's in the marketing material. If you have not seen a trailer, God bless, do not read further and go see the movie. Like, that's how I want people to experience
Yeah.
it. But we live in a world where, like, Deadpool and Wolverine, half the movie was spoiled through like set photos, and it's on social media. Like, it's impossible to get around these things now. So for me, I'm still protective of the audience because I do want them to have the best experience possible. I myself, as a critic, still don't like watching trailers, so I won't do it as much as possible. But the flip side, as a writer, what am I supposed to do by not digging into the meat of a movie? And I think it'll be a fun conversation because I kind of disagree with you a little bit. Like, I don't think there's much else to discover in Companion. I think it's
Ooh.
very boilerplate. I don't think it's doing anything amazing. I think it's whelming, and that's not bad. I just think it's a solid 3 out of 5, like one of those kind of films.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is talking about all the effort that goes into not spoiling or spoiling the film. For folks who haven't read your review, Donato, I checked it out your letterbox before I saw it. So I haven't had a chance to double back and read your review yet. But I did read kind of like the blurb that you shared in there, as well as your overall rating. You gave it 3 out of 5. Whelmed, I think, is a particularly good way of putting it. So what was it? Where did you end up with it? What did you like about it? And what did you maybe not like about it?
What I like about it is the core concept. It is very fun. We're looking at the idea of artificial intelligence, and especially in the hand of these like little weirdo incels and people who are going to do bad things with it. I mean, we can't escape this parallel to reality. We have sad people in charge of many corporations that are now harvesting our data and all these things, and they're the same kind of sad loser that Jack Quaid's character is. I mean, like, a Zuckerberg is the same kind of guy. He just has millions of dollars. He's still the guy that created a
Right.
fucking website to say if a girl's hot or not because he didn't have anything better to do. And well, so for me, in that kind of regard, what is displayed and what Sophie Thatcher is doing, I do enjoy a good deal. As a comedic anti-romance where the relationship falls apart because we realize the guy just wants to be in charge, and once he can't be, he's bored, those things of that nature. Fun. Yeah. I like when she gets to go crazy. I like when she gets to have her little comeuppance. But the problem for me is it feels too contained, and I don't think it pushes any farther than what we expect. There's one surprise that I won't say that did make me go, oh, that's a fun little twist. But that twist is still early on. And then what they do with it, where Sophie Thatcher, it becomes like a hunt and chase movie where Sophie Thatcher runs away. The group of friends who are there, that Jack Quaid brought, they are now trying to hunt Sophie Thatcher. It just didn't do much for me. Like, it again, I can't get away from whelmed being the right descriptor
Yeah.
because it goes through the motions. A few people die, see some blood, but even at that, the third act just doesn't feel like the right payoff for what we saw. It just kind of ends, and I maybe that's in line with the like more rom-commy roasting going on, but at the same time, it just kind of left me. It's from a sitcom director, and it just does feel like an overlong sitcom versus like a feature film.
I disagree, but I think that part of the reason I disagree is more revealing about me than it is about you. So there is a particular brand, and you know this, Donato. There's a particular brand of high concept, low concept that I am just like the biggest mark for in the world. There is something about a movie that is like not full of any surprises, but also executing at like its 99th percentile that just makes me so delighted. I When I was watching this movie, there were a couple of times, because I saw it at a draft house. You don't talk at a draft house. There was a couple of times where something would happen on screen, and I would tap Andrea on the shoulder and just point, and I'd be like, like a nose and a point. She'd be like, "Got it." And after the movie was over, she said, what did you think?" And I was like, "Oh, I loved it." And I did. This is like a 4.5 for me. This was like my vibes. It does everything that I think, horror comedies get wrong. It does like it's like comedy with horror as opposed to horror comedy. It's like perfectly calibrated for my senses. And the first thing Andrea said was like, "Wait, but you called so much of this stuff that was going on in the movie. I thought you were going to be like frustrated or disappointed." It's like, no, the movie did everything I wanted it to. Like every scene that it made some kind of a choice, that was the choice I wanted it to make. That was like the fun, high concept, low concept version of the film. And so me walking out of it, I think that there's going to be a lot of people that probably think that it leaves money on the table. I totally understand that perspective. But for me, the fact that it isn't trying to be a horror comedy, it's like a black comedy more than anything else with like a little bit of horror elements to it. The fact that it takes some big narrative swings, but also has some dumb narrative moments, but they seem pretty well in balance. And the fact that they do try and find some pathos to the whole thing with some of the characters and what is happening with them that I do agree. I don't want to spoil in this, so we won't talk about that, the characters in question. I don't know. It's a nice balance for me, and it does remind me of things like The Perfection, other films where it's just doing everything both well and kind of cheesy, and it all fits. And I get that like a movie that is both good and bad at the same time is not going to be for everybody.
Yeah, I go with more high concept mid delivery. It comes in for me without it. I wasn't enthusiastic a lot of the time, and neither was my screening. My screening was very tempered. There wasn't a lot of hooting and hollering. There was just a lot of like, "Oh, haha, yeah, that's cool." Sophie Thatcher, Lovebot. Oh, she's gonna jack her intelligence up. Oh, he's controlling her with an app. Oh, okay. Like one by one, the pieces are just kind of falling into place where I never felt myself truly. I think to go back on Grafted, let's say, that we talked about last week, which is on Shutter now, and what that movie does with body horror, I give it a little more credit because I think it just goes harder into the paint. Where like we're going to be a body horror movie, we might be indie, but we're still going to like give you some good gross out moments, all that stuff. Where Companion to me feels brisk in not the right way. It kind of breezes through the story it's telling, and we know what is bad about AI. We know what to do, and to me, again, like the big thing is Jack Quaid's character and the idea that technology in the hands of these sad, lonely losers. That's the biggest scare. Like it's might not even
Mm-hmm.
be AI itself. It's who's using it and the wrong people using it. And where we eventually get to at the end of the film, it doesn't feel like the reward was exactly worth what we got to. It wraps up in the exact same way for me where it ended and I went, okay, yeah. I get it. Like I get it. I get your movie. I just the pulse never raised, like all that stuff. I
Yeah.
never felt the thrills. I only felt the comedy here and there. But even then, my laughs were tempered. I wasn't for something like Opus, let's say, which I just saw at Sundance. Opus is a very mid film, but it made me laugh very hard at times, and that's why it gets a little more. Where Companion to me again is a mid film, but I didn't have that same kind of elation. I didn't have those moments where I could look back
Sure.
on and an Opus say like, oh, John Malkovich fucking doing a whole Liberace Freddie Mercury performance thrusting on stage. Like, yeah, great. I'm gonna remember that forever. Companion, what happens in the third act that I won't spoil, I'm not even going to remember that.
Hmm. Well, isn't there something to be said for the fact that this movie it's again that like high concept, low concept balance. It's sort of a like it reminds me a little bit of what was the film that came out a few years ago about like the murder mystery, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies? Is that the yeah? So like it feels a little bit in the same kind of vein of that, which is another movie that I really liked, where it's kind of like a murder mystery, like a classic style murder mystery masquerading a little bit as a horror movie. And part of that is the fact that it's decidedly cheaper than it looks, right? Which is not a knock on the film. The film looks great. Cast looks great. The special effects that they pull off of what I can only assume is a relatively limited budget in the movie also look really good. But it's not really interested in being more than group of people, not a cabin in the woods, but like a lake house in the woods and shit goes sideways. That's the story that it's there to tell. And there's something that I inherently like about movies that are hemmed in from the beginning and are basically like, our ceiling is only going to be a B plus movie. So let's make the best fucking B plus movie that we could possibly make.
So I get that, and I'm looking at my phone because I wanted to double check this, and like this is Drew Hancock's debut, like sorry, his feature
Mm-hmm.
debut filmmaking.
He has a 9-minute short film with Tenacious D that is technically his film debut.
Correct. Apologies. Live
Mm-hmm.
action feature film debut, let's say.
Correct.
But this is also from Boulder Light. These are the same production team that put out something like Barbarian, and I feel like they were trying to hit that same note where high concept delivery, what we can do, but Barbarian like goes so hard, it just has such an edge to it, and whether or not that's what Drew Hancock wanted to do with Companion, and to regards to what we were saying before, because I do think this is a comedy first, but when you're making the kind of film that's supposed to have thrills too, you have to hit that balance. Like something has to
Mm-hmm.
be there to spike, something has to be there to really like engage the core concept that this is both thrilling and comical. And I think back on like my favorite moments of it, and they pretty much all revolve around like Sophie Thatcher, Jack Quaid working with her too. He is a proper just sad boy. Like I kind of
Yeah.
joked, I'm like, I think he might have modeled his character after, one of the Homelander sycophants. Like that's where this is coming from. Like his character feels like someone who would like worship Homelander, that kind of guy. But at the end of the day, like I don't think Sophie Thatcher's even given enough to do to make it like an amazing role. She does great with what is given when it's kind of joking about rom-com stuff and the idea that in Companion you buy your love bot and you can program them with memories, and she thinks she met Jack Quaid's character, in a supermarket, and a hilarious meet cute. And that moment is so funny. Like when you're watching it, you kind of clue into, okay, this
Yeah.
this can be a roasty, very funny kind of film, but I'm now gonna take Hard Eyes into consideration because I can talk about that too. And I saw that, and I liked Hard Eyes a good deal because while it is a very funny rom com, anti rom com, at the same time, it's also doing the genre elements really well. And I feel like that comparison to me is where Companion loses me, because the genre elements just felt there for this to serve the story, and it, again, it's a fine story. I'd put it on any day in the background and be happy with it. But again, I'm gonna seek out Hard Eyes because that thing, as a Valentine's Day slasher that is a love story and a slasher, you get
Mm-hmm.
both with like meaty handfuls. Like you get a lot of everything. And Companion to me is, looking at the deaths and stuff like that. I mean, one character is just like the quick little like, oh, gunshot, good, we're on to the next one. Oh, this happens. Okay, we're on to the next thing. Like it just feels like a perpetual motion that doesn't really have an oomph of steam behind it. It's just going, it's chugging along.
Yeah.
Again, it gets to the end. It gets from point A to point B.
And it depends on what you're going in for too, right? Because I think that it is billing itself as a horror film in the same vein as a Barbarian or something like that, which is totally fine. I mean, that is the mode of cinema that we're in right now. I keep referring to The Perfection as a touch point, which isn't really a horror film, or is a like I think it's a horror film, but you probably would have people to categorize it differently. I think this movie's probably closer to something like Villains, the Bill Skarsgård, Micah Monroe, although I know you like that one a lot more than this one. um kind of, again, black comedy is a like, if there's we need a phrase for black comedy that like is horror tinged, sort of like a de-elevated horror. I don't know what to call it. But the one thing that I do want to ask you, Donato, with regards to this film too, is I'm curious how you think this is going to be received, because like, Andrea, that her modus operandi, like her mantra in life is like, why should I give a shit about a robot? Like, never, like, doesn't give a shit about Battlestar Galactica, didn't give a shit about Sophie Thatcher in this one. It's just like, they're not people. We actually had like a discussion that got a little heated on the car ride home about what is the nature of consciousness. It doesn't really matter. But the point being is that I think we're living in a time right now where people are so like hyper tense about AI, and not even necessarily about what AI can do, but what people want AI to be able to do, what they want it to be able to replace, what CEOs and hedge fund managers think that AI should be able to do in society. There's a part of me that was, as I was coming out of the movie, I was thinking, if this came out in like 2003, this movie would fucking mop the floor and it would feel totally appropriate with like the emerging consciousness type stories. I wonder if it hits a little differently for audiences in 2025. Do you feel like it's a little hamstrung by the environment?
that might be exactly why I think it is a little bit underwhelming in the grand scheme, because that's my complaint. My complaint is cool. We've seen this. We know what AI is capable of doing. And in 2003, yeah, it is a higher concept. I want to say this is high concept, but for 2003, the idea of like a sex robot or relationship robot going back against what it does, I do think that is going to be received better because this story does not punch above its weight class. It tells you what it is up front. And that is also a big thing with me. It tells you how the movie ends up front, and it does exactly what it tells you. And I get that is something that is used often, but I go right back to my complaints about the payoff not being there for the reward, because you are now like 5 times behind the 8 ball for me. Because, okay, you've told me what's going to happen at the end of the movie. I am expecting it. We all know it's telegraphed like a fucking football field away. And for how it exits and just how it gives that to you, coupled with everything I just said, with the idea of AI being such a hot button issue, but you have nothing new to say. I don't think the reinvention of the subgenre and the reinvention of AI fears in this grips me in any different way than any comparable AI horror thriller, sorry, comedy horror thriller. Let's throw those all
Yeah.
in there since 2000. Y2K has ushered that in a long time ago. And I had way more fun with the movie Y2K. So
Oof.
like that is, oh yeah, no, I'm happy to say I'm one of the only people that likes that goddamn movie. So I'm fine with it.
I believe, based on the preponderance of evidence, that people find Kyle Mooney funny. I can't for the life of me figure out why. That's all I'll have to say about that. Unless
I
you want to get a word in.
No, I was gonna say, have you watched his other movies like Brigsby Bear and stuff?
No, I haven't seen Brigsby
I
Bear, but I've seen a bunch of his like web shorts, and they're just not for
So
me.
I think Brigsby might actually hit you because he's not trying to be Y2K Kyle Mooney. Anyway, that's another topic. I'm gonna get you
Yeah,
to watch Brigsby
yeah.
Bear.
Talk
Anyway,
about that in a different podcast. I was going to ask a question about, and I think I kind of lost it. We were talking about the comedy and the period. I think that there's probably a lot of people that are going to turn on the movie the moment that they foreshadow the end, just to your point, right? Because I love that shit. I can't, like, I'm kiss kiss bang bang all the way. I'm like unreliable, like overreaching, sweaty narrator start to finish. It is a trope that I have never gotten tired of. It might make me basic. I don't care. I like it when the narrators put their thumbs on the scale. But it's definitely one of those things, right? Like, I can understand without agreeing, but I can understand why, combined with some of the, foreshadowing of the narrator stuff, which is certainly a little sweaty, and the fact that it's not necessarily stepping on the gas particularly hard when it comes to horror themes. Yeah, I get it. I get why this would be whelming, but I do want to say, a couple of shout outs within the, like, everybody in this movie is great. So the entire cast, whether you love it like me or thought it was solid like Donato, the cast is awesome. Lucas Gage is quickly becoming another Scream king. He, between this and Smile 2, has had just like an amazing 12 months. This is the first time, because I never really watched What We Do in the Shadows, the first time I've seen Harvey Guillen on screen for an extended period of time, and I really liked him in this. So there's a lot of fun stuff happening with the characters. And I think that this feels like a movie that we might go back in a couple of years and like it more because of what we've seen everybody do in the interim. Maybe.
I mean, also Rupert Friend doing a Russian kind of
Yes.
gangster. Like, you do have some good character work here. I do especially want to call out Lucas Gage because, in my opinion, Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid carry the film, but
Sure.
Lucas Gage is right there providing like tremendous support. I do feel like Harvey Guillen is just playing a trope and and that's fine. Like, he is funny. Like, I do love seeing him on screen, so there was nothing wrong with any of the performances. It is when you do the thing in the beginning that the narrator does and tell you how it ends, just to like hit this one more time, that is a challenge. You
Nails on a
now,
chalkboard, yeah,
well,
for some people.
it's not nails on chalkboard for me though. That's the thing. So for me, it's okay. How are you going to take me into the ending I already know and still not make me care? Because that's the mark of like a good film. A good film can tell you how it's going to end, take you on the craziest journey the entire way there, or maybe take a straight line to it, but just make a fireworks display of how it ends. So
Mm.
there are ways around all of that. And like my last sticking point on that whole idea is Companion just gives it to you. It's just here. It's served up to you. The entire movie is served up to you. You go through it, and okay. And so yeah, so we're talking about like the performances, everything's good. Um, Megan Suri too, like not just. I think every person in the actual cast is doing a lot, but it's a lot of meh.
Last question for you. Did you like we don't need to talk about the end, but I'm always we talked about this on a recent episode. I don't remember what it was, but we talked about how I think it might have actually been the Grafted episode about how movies are not like a thing that you finish and then evaluate. They're a meter that goes up and down in real time, like a Geiger counter, I think is what I called it. I really wanted this movie to stick the ending in terms of like how the conflict between Josh and Iris is resolved. Were you satisfied with that last thing? Did that stick it for you or no? Even saying that it was foreshadowed, what is it a nice way to wrap up the story?
I'll go right back to saying the payoff was not as big as it should have been.
Okay.
And my needle didn't move. That's a good way of putting it. The entire time I watched this movie, I started at average, and my needle did not really jump up and down. My needle just went dip, 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 just along, like it just stayed. So it didn't go down. That's good. It's not
Yep.
bad, but it didn't jump up either, which isn't great. So it's like it just stuck. It didn't flatline. It just stayed at a normal line there. So I just wanted more. It's a bummer because I when you like a movie and you don't love it, I think that's just such a hard thing for me because it's like
It's the
that
worst.
3 out of 5 and writing that review of just being like, yeah, it's a movie. It accomplished something. Everyone should be proud. And I'll probably never think of it again. Like that sucks.
Well, 4.5 for me. It's going to be on my top horror list at the end of the year. It stands a pretty decent chance of being one of my favorite films by the end of the year. So I got us both covered, bub. I got your three. I got my 4.5. We're rolling a 4-ish, 3.85 or whatever between the two of us. So that's it. Companion is playing in theaters now. Caveat emptor, whichever one of us you tend to agree with the most, you'll probably be the person you agree with on this film too. So go check it out. If you have been spoiled about the Sophie Thatcherness, there's still stuff in there. That is not the last time that the movie shows you something. It may work for you. It did for me. It may not work for you. It didn't for Donato. But that's not the only narrative thing that the movie has in its back pocket. So there are still things to discover as you watch the movie. Donato, you are crashing at the end of a long week in Sundance, but I know you have a ton of reviews that have already been published. I'm sure you're probably sitting on a few that are coming out like this weekend, tomorrow as well. I get your authory digests every Friday. I think this one's going to be kind of big. Where do people go to follow you on social media? Where can people find you online?
You can find me, Matt Donato, at DonatoBomb, DonatoBomb, primarily and largely at Blue Sky, whatever the handle is after that. So Donato Bomb and all that other stuff. And then Instagram and Letterboxd, those are my primaries. I was saying for a little while I was going to start TikTok, but then it became a tool for the wrong people. So probably going to hold off on that one until I figure out what that means. So you can find my Sundance reviews. My two recommendations I'll give you all right now is The Ugly Stepsister, which is a fucked up take on Cinderella. And that is going to hit Shudder. That was purchased already, which is great. And then Touch Me, a literal representation of trauma porn using hentai and Japanese influences that is fucking beautiful, and it's a lot of fun. So those are my two big ones from Sundance, and you'll see some more stuff because Monogle's right. I still have more movies to watch from Sundance. I ain't done yet. What are you talking about?
Is it a real quick question for you? Last question. Is it better or worse when the first movie you watch at a film festival ends up being your favorite?
I think it's worse
Okay.
because
I would agree with that.
it was my first Sundance in person and doing Foley, so for me it was a very fun experience. But I will say the chatter on the ground was a lot of I came to Sundance for this year, so
Well, they can't all be winners. But if you want to hear about winners, if you want to hear about really good horror movies, you can follow Certified Forgotten. You can go to www.certifiedforgotten.com. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, wherever you like to get your content. I promise that we're there. You can follow both the site and myself on Blue Sky as well. I am monogle.bluesky.social, and Certified Forgotten is on there too. Got a lot of really cool stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks. I think Donato, you and we're going to have a conversation about Hard Eyes. You've seen it. I haven't. It's one of my most anticipated movies of the year. I fucking love Josh Rubin. I'm
yeah,
here
I
and
think we
pumping for
should.
him. It- That'll be a
I am
future episode.
curious. Yeah,
Mhm.
now I'm thinking about how you're going to take it, but judging by how this went, I don't know. I think you might be good.
Loved Scare Me, was underwhelmed by Werewolves Within, so we'll see. This is going to be same.
Big time me too. Big time me too.
Okay. All right. This will be a nice third time's the charm. But that's it. Thank you so much. And if you're watching, thank you so much for watching. We might do more of these. Leave a comment. Let us know if this is the way that you would like to digest and ingest the Certified Forgotten podcast. And hey, we'll give it a shot. But have yourselves a great weekend. Say bye, Rogers. Bye, Rogers.